This week's headlines carried two very different names, a rock legend and a Hollywood actress, but a faith blog reflecting on both deaths this week points to something older than either of their careers. A psalm attributed to a man named Eythan the Ezrahite, and the question he asked more than 2,000 years ago that somehow still fits the news cycle of August 2026. The connection starts with the sheer coincidence of timing. Hayden Panettiere died on August 16 at the age of 36, found unresponsive at an apartment complex in Greenville, South Carolina, with an official cause of death still pending. Just one day later, on August 17, ZZ Top drummer Frank Beard died in hospice care at his ranch in Richmond, Texas, at the age of 77. Two lives that couldn't have looked more different on paper: a 36-year-old former child star whose fame began before she could walk, and a 77-year-old rock musician who spent 56 years quietly anchoring one of Texas's most iconic bands from behind the drum kit, ended within 24 hours of each other, both leaving behind grieving families and stunned fans processing losses that arrived without warning. That's where Eythan enters the picture. Eythan the Ezrahite is credited as the author of Psalm 89 in the Hebrew Bible, a psalm that opens by celebrating God's steadfast faithfulness across generations before pivoting, in its later verses, into a raw, almost desperate confrontation with mortality. Eythan asks plainly, what man is there who can live and never see death, who can deliver his own soul from the power of the grave? It's not a rhetorical flourish. It's the kind of question that surfaces naturally when public figures die suddenly and close together, the way Panettiere and Beard did this week, prompting people to reach for something larger than the news cycle to make sense of it. Panettiere's death arrived with a particular kind of shock because of how openly she'd been living and speaking in the months right before it. She'd published a memoir, This Is Me, A Reckoning, earlier this year, detailing decades of struggle with addiction and postpartum depression following the birth of her daughter Kaya in 2014. She'd also sat for an unusually candid 2-hour podcast conversation with Jay Shetty in May, discussing her childhood in Hollywood, her complicated relationship with her mother, and her hope for what came next in her life. That conversation, meant as a new beginning, has since become one of the more painful pieces of her legacy, a woman speaking with real optimism about the future just months before that future was cut short. Her family, including her father Skip, described her as an incredible light and a force of nature. Her ex-fiancé, Vladimir Klitschko, father of her daughter, released his own statement describing profound shock and grief, promising to always speak of her with respect so their daughter grows up understanding who her mother truly was. Beard's death, by contrast, arrived after a much quieter, more private decline, one that unfolded gradually over roughly 18 months of health setbacks, recoveries, and eventual withdrawal from touring, until ZZ Top was forced to cancel its August 5th Hollywood Bowl show just weeks before his passing. Where Panettiere's life had been lived largely in public, discussed candidly in interviews and a memoir, Beard's final chapter stayed almost entirely behind closed doors, ending at the Texas ranch he'd called home for years, surrounded by his wife, Debbie Meredith, and their family. Billy Gibbons, ZZ Top's frontman and now the band's sole surviving original member, called him one of the most naturally innovative drummers and a true son of Texas, crediting his steady backbeat with keeping the band at its peak for as long as it stayed there. What Eythan's ancient question captures, and what makes it resonate even now, isn't really about the manner of either death. It's about the universality underneath both of them. Eythan wasn't writing about celebrities or public tragedy specifically. He was writing about the basic, unavoidable reality that no amount of talent, fame, wealth, or resilience buys anyone exemption from mortality. Panettiere had survived so much publicly already: addiction, postpartum depression, a painful period of losing custody of her daughter, the sudden 2023 death of her younger brother Jansen, and had spoken hopefully just months earlier about having more life ahead of her. Beard had survived his own well-documented struggles decades earlier, a period of heavy drug spending following ZZ Top's late 1970's breakthrough that he later worked through in rehabilitation, going on to build 56 more years of career and family life afterward. Both stories in their own ways were about people who had already weathered real difficulty and kept going. And both still ended the same way ancient wisdom literature insists every human story eventually does. There's something worth sitting with in the fact that neither death happened in isolation from a much larger context. This has been an unusually heavy stretch for sudden losses across entertainment and public life more broadly, prompting figures like actress Michelle Rodriguez to publicly voice unease this same week about just how many people, and how many young people specifically, seem to be dying in quick succession lately. That kind of collective bewilderment is exactly the emotional territory Eythan's psalm was written for, not to explain why death happens, but to give language to the disorientation people feel when it keeps happening again and again to people who felt from the outside larger than life. Neither Panettiere's nor Beard's family has framed their loss in explicitly religious terms in public statements so far, and it would be inaccurate to suggest otherwise. What connects them isn't a shared faith, a shared industry, or even a shared cause of death, one still under investigation, the other never publicly disclosed. What connects them, at least through this particular lens, is simply the reminder Eythan's ancient words keep offering, that fame, longevity, and resilience are not the same thing as permanence, and that grief, whether for a 36-year-old actress or a 77-year-old drummer, tends to ask the same old unanswerable question, whether it's phrased in a psalm 3,000 years old or in a headline written this week.